Wake Forest on the road, and that is 13 consecutive wins for the number 2 team in the country. Duke wins it 63-56.
Duke basketball returns to action in the second game this season against Wake Forest, looking to continue, I should say, the North Carolina revenge tour with 2 more games against in-state rivals this week, starting off with tomorrow night's game with Wake Forest. They won the first game 63-56. It was certainly a tale of two halves where Duke got out to a big lead in the first half, and then I think it was like a 17-1 run by Wake Forest, which gave them the lead. Their crowd was back in it, and then Cooper Flagg, along with Mason Gillis, really steadied the ship for Duke, and they were able to come out with the 7-point win over Wake Forest. And now this game will be at home for Duke. I am going to assume still no Tyrese Proctor, still no Malik Brown for this one, but based off of how the last game went, I'm not sure that's going to matter, but we'll break all of that down and more today as we break down the matchup with Wake Forest in game number 2. What do you think, JD? What's the number one thing you're looking forward to in this game?
I'm really excited to have a game against someone who is on the bubble. And while, if you're on the bubble and you can see that you're on the bubble for getting into the March Madness tournament, it adds an incentive. And with Hildreth and Hunter Salas, I expect them to be giving us their best because you never know at this point. If you're considered a bubble team, you got one game left, you go on a little run in the ACC tournament, you might just make it. And Coach Steve Forbes is a really good motivator. And they, as you described it, they had a chance to beat us. So I see, I'm very happy the game's at home.
I agree. To your point, let's talk about where Wake Forest is right now. They're 20-9. They're 12-6 in conference play, and they have unfortunately lost 3 of their last 5, which has dropped them from a good spot in the bubble to a very treacherous spot where they sit currently. And those losses have hurt. And they've been to the Florida State team that was a little bit different. They had Malik Ewan in that game. But still, Duke beat that team without Proctor, without Malik Brown, and without Cooper Flagg for, let's call it, a quarter of the game. Handily, as we all know. They also dropped one to NC State, which, if you look at the record, you would understand. But NC State gave Duke a lot of trouble in that matchup out of seemingly nowhere. And they dropped a game to Virginia, who's been playing better of late, but Duke won the game against Virginia handily. And I think most importantly, one of those 5 wins was yesterday during the afternoon against Notre Dame. They won 74-71, and they were down as many as 9 points with about 10 minutes to go. And it took a big effort from Cam Hildreth to get them the win in that game. He scored 28 points. And I think when you talk about motivation for Hildreth and Salas, this is their last season of college basketball. They're really good players. And I think for Hildreth specifically, he's been with Wake Forest his entire career. And I was listening to their post-game press conference with Coach Forbes, and he talks about how Hildreth committed to Wake Forest. He's from England. He said he didn't know Coach Forbes when he came. He never went to the school. And he said he gives Hildreth a lot of credit because he stuck to the team when in an era where a lot of guys transfer when you don't get playing time. He talked about a story where he told Hildreth not to do something. He did it. And then during his freshman year, he benched him for 4 games before playing him again. He only played about 10 minutes a game as a freshman. But I think it says a lot about Cam Hildreth, his ability to, his persistence, his resilience, And this is their chance to stake a claim for the NCAA tournament. Even with this win, I'm not sure they get in, but without it, they certainly have a much steeper hill to climb. And they're going to be very motivated to get this win at Duke tomorrow night at 7 o'clock.
I'm well, I got spanked for predicting a 5-point win in the last game. This is just a crazy stat that Duke has won their last 6 games by an average of 31.3 points per game. That is just, I mean, I know I always go on about, the lack of competition, but they have averaged winning by 31 points per game in the last 6 games. So there's something else that John Shire's got cooking there, because they're not, that they're teams that maybe I thought in some cases had a chance to have a close game. This game, at least, the players are there. There is you can point to the game that they played the first time they met at Wake Forest to say, come on, guys, you guys can play with them. And, this is your ticket to, you beat them, that bubble becomes real. And then it's a question of how they play in the ACC tournament. And so I think the warrior that I am, not warrior that I am, I'm definitely going to be a little worried about tomorrow night. And you alluded earlier to the injury report. There'll definitely be no Malik Brown. He will be out for as long as they can keep him out until they absolutely need him. Or, Jose, the trainer, says, no, he's good to go. He's all right. We'll see. There's no question Malik wants to play. And really good news on the Tyrese Proctor front that apparently, bone bruise coming along really well. But I'm going to say he's not playing tomorrow night. He's definitely not going to play. I could see a world in which if it's just a question of some pain, where he'll want to play against North Carolina.
Knowing Proctor the little that we know, and I mean, we've watched him play now for 3 years. He's a very competitive player. So, and he has had a lot of success in his matchup against RJ Davis defensively. So I think he'll want to be out there for sure. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, I have a quote I wanted to read from Coach Hamilton. In those 6 games, the closest margin of victory was the 18-point win that Duke had at Virginia, which really wasn't that close. Virginia scored some buckets late to make it closer. But Coach Hamilton, after the game, had this to say about Duke. He said, I thought this was the most connected, executing Duke team that we've played against in the many times we've been here. Each time you make a mistake, they make you pay. They play to who they are. They play to each other. That's Coach Hamilton has been at Florida State for over 20 years. I think you have to give a lot of weight to that statement from Coach Hamilton in terms of him basically saying this is the best Duke team he's played against in his many words.
Just the last clause was poetic. They play to who they are. They play for each other, or they play to each other. What did he say?
They play to who they are. They play to each other, which makes sense based off of apparently Coach Hamilton has said once his coaching career with Florida State wraps up, he's looking to get into, he wants to play the guitar. He wants to get into the piano. So you saying it was, a little like poetic makes sense with his musical background, right? But I just think that says a lot about the caliber of this Duke team with a coach who I think he's one of the best coaches certainly in ACC history, and he's really done a great job at Florida State. On a little bit of a side note, I think part of the reason why the ACC is down is because you look at the coaches. There's a graphic put up during the Wake Forest game that over the past handful of years, 5,500 wins from 6 coaches have left the ACC. When you look at Coach K, Boeheim, Mike Bray, Hamilton after this season, Larinaga, and Tony Bennett, it's a lot of wins, a lot of coaching experience, and it makes sense that there's a bit of turnover going on right now. I don't think it's all NIL. I think it's a combination of both of those things happening at the same time. So I think ACC basketball will start to get back on track next year. But for right now, for this game with Wake Forest, the one thing I am, like you said, maybe not. You're more of a worrier than I would say I am, but I've certainly been concerned. I wasn't too far away from what you had the Florida State margin being. I had it at 10, although I did think Ewan was going to play. The thing I'm most curious about in this game is Wake Forest they're clearly led by Salas and Hildreth. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys that. I think everybody knows that, right? But the difference in this game is going to be we won't have Proctor. And I thought last time with having Proctor and Sion, it made it it was a lot easier for Duke to match up. I'm not sure, even though Evans' defense has been so much better of late, I'm not sure this is a great matchup for him with the physicality of Hildreth and Salas' ability to create space. I think you'd certainly rather have Proctor, and so I'm curious how Duke is going to look to match up with those two guys, especially because Hildreth missed a lot of that first matchup due to foul trouble. Now, Juke Harris played really well, so I don't know how much it would have made a difference in that game, but Hildreth certainly, it's his senior year. This is his shot to get his team for the first time to the NCAA tournament. He's going to be coming out, with a real chip on his shoulder to try to make it happen.
All right. I said 5 points last time. It'll be between, we'll save the actual score to later, but it could be a really close game. From the Duke side, I look to see. I think Coach Shire settled who the starter is in place of Proctor. He really likes Isaiah. He didn't care how many shots he took. They expected him to do it, and he finishes the leading scorer for the game. And actually, some of it was really fun because if he understands, look, there's no question that if he gets the ball, quick draw will put it up from 3. But his drives to the basket are really, really impressive. And you wish consciously, all right, maybe not 3 for 3 will go up from 3-point range. 2 out of 3 will be someone's coming at him and then just take off and make that really integrated into his game. So I think that's one thing. And I also think that Evans, we're going to see the Evans get the minutes. I don't think that.
Wait. Do you mean Harris right now?
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry. I feel like I did a good job reading your mind there.
You did. Harris will get the minutes.
He was. But speaking of Shire, he was really proud of Harris and what he was able to do in his post-game remarks. Speaking of his post-game remarks, I have another quote I wanted to share because he was talking about Cooper. And we all saw, there was the moment they showed on the broadcast where Cooper's mom, if I have this right, Kelly, she went to go check on him, and then he went to go sit on the bench. And so I guess Coach Shire, they were they wanted to make sure, number one, it wouldn't get worse, right? In the second half, and they could play him. Once they knew that was the case, he was going to play him. And he was like, and based off how he played, he was, he seemed to be all right. But apparently, Cooper's mom was yelling at him at halftime to rebound and defend if he's going back into the game. And Coach Shire said, I didn't have to say much after that.
I heard that. And I also, the other thing that I took away from that was that he, according to Shire, Coop was initially looked something Shire hadn't seen in him, scared, because initially his eyesight was blurry.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he went back, because remember, he goes back twice. And the second time he goes back, I'm not certain every team has this, but
Right.
the eye doctor was there from the Duke Medical Center to immediately check on him and said there was no damage to the eye itself and his vision. It was more of the eyelid itself got bruised, and that was what he was dealing with. And so once you told him that, he just came back and had the second half that he did. He was fine. And I do get a kick out of the resources that Duke basketball has. It's like he's immediately checked out by their eye surgeon.
I think that was certainly one of the. It was fortunate that game was at home, because I have to wonder whether the eye doctor travels with the team or he was just at Cameron, right? We know Jose, the trainer, is going to be there on the road, but I don't know about the eye doctor. If he's going to be traveling with the team. But, I mean, maybe for the foreseeable future, he will be. They got to make sure Cooper's eyelid's okay. And based off of how much money he generates, I think they can afford it in the budget to, pay for the eye doctor's travel expenses, how expensive they might be.
Jack, in addition to Hildreth and Hunter, are there other players that you're looking for on Wake that could give us trouble tomorrow night?
I mean, they don't play a ton of guys. They play 7 guys. They lost Cosby to injury, and they've really stuck to, sometimes Omaha Billieu will get a couple of minutes, but it's really 6, and the 7th guy, Fredrickson, he's been kind of hit and miss. So Duke Harris, we know what he's capable of because he did it against Duke in the last matchup where he had 14 points and filled in really well for Cam Hildreth. We know about Efton Reed, what he can do, as he's a big body in the middle of the paint. It will be interesting, or it's essential, I should say, for Wake Forest that Efton Reed stays out of foul trouble, because Duke will have 10 fouls between Gangba and Malawach, and he only has 5, and he fouled out of the last game. He's got a penchant for being in foul trouble, and they can't afford it with their short rotation. Trayvon Spillers is the guy who, when they went on the run, he knocked down a 3. He got, I think it was like a push shot near the basket. He was part of that run that Wake Forest went on. He's like 6'7". He can, I mean, how do I want to say this? He has the ability to make things a little bit more challenging for Cooper. He's averaged 10.6 rebounds, over a block, and about a steal per game. His three-point shot isn't necessarily his strength, but he can knock him down. Kind of similar to like Mark Mitchell from, like we all remember from Duke, where it's not really the strength of his game, but if he's in rhythm, he can knock it down. And those are 6 of the 7 guys. The 7th guy is Tyler Johnson, who had a number of assists against Duke in that matchup, the first matchup. He's their leading assist guy. He lets Hildreth and Salas play off the ball, which is important. It helps them play better. But part of the reason they are where they are is they haven't gotten the level of point guard play that they did even last year with Boopy Miller. He's not nearly as good. He's not a capable shooter. And for Wake Forest to win this game, Tyler Johnson's going to have to play well. And if he doesn't play well, he's got to kind of stay out of the way because there's been times where he has cost them games in the past with questionable decision making. And so it's going to be important for Wake Forest that he plays well or stays out of the way, one or the other, to keep them in this game against Duke.
Coach Shire referred to the play of Con Knipple as, it's hard to say that he is a point guard, but we were actually saying that, he really was functioning as their point guard last night. And if he goes back to that because he was very satisfied with K2's play, is there a matchup then that may make him less effective trying to play the point guard role?
It's a good question. I think Hildreth, because it's interesting. Hildreth, Khan as of late, I mean, he's done it most of the year, but especially as of late, he likes to, play bully ball, get inside, and score, right? Hildreth likes to do the same thing. He's just a little bit smaller than Khan, but he's older. And so I'm curious if Hildreth will be able to stand up to that better than other people because he is strong. He likes to bang in the paint. He's physical as a guard, but he is like 6'4", 200 versus Khan 6'7", closer to 220. Let me make sure I have Hildreth's weight right. But the other thing, though, I think Duke will be better off, especially if Sion is not in foul trouble, if Sion is on the ball as the point guard, because then Khan he's more of a threat off the ball than Sion, with his ability to shoot from the outside. Yes, Sion can knock it down, but I think Khan spaces the floor much better because you're really worried about Khan hitting 4 or 5 3-pointers, whereas Sion may hit 2 or 3 at most.
So I don't recall the date of the first Wake Forest game. Had Sion already assumed the role as the point guard, or bringing it up because we among lots of other people were saying, you got to get Foster out of this. Had it already occurred at that point?
So he was the starting point guard. Interestingly enough, coming off of a game where he was in foul trouble, it's Jamie time. Dog is trying to break down the door. He's hungry. He was in foul trouble that game. So he started the game, but he only played 18 minutes because he was in foul trouble in the first half. So I imagine he will play considerably more. Foster played 10 minutes. The big guy off the bench, the most minutes off the bench for Duke in that game was Mason Gillis, who had 23 minutes in that matchup versus Wake Forest. And the other thing, now that we're going back to that first game a little bit more, Gangba had a really nice bucket towards the end of that game. He played 21 minutes. He played really well overall in that game against Wake Forest, and that was kind of the breakout game in a close contest for Gangba. He had some other decent performances, but that was the first one in like a Duke really needed it. There haven't been a ton of those games this year, but that was one of the few.
Well, I'm glad you were able to do it. Look, there haven't been a lot of games where we could go and say what happened in the first game because of the size of the ACC. There are still some matchups. When we do North Carolina, we'll be able to talk about it also there, but Wake is an example, and it's a game in which they gave us a scare. And so, you know, look, I think with injuries to Malik, with injuries to uh, Proctor, I do not see him playing. Um, I, I so here's what it's going to come down to for me. It's going to be, is this, because you said they've been, Wake Forest has been inconsistent in the final 5 games, which is when, if you're going to not be a bubble team, you really have to bring it every night. So is this a night because you can get them motivated because they did really play, with us for that game? Or is this whatever's been created since the Clemson loss, in which we're beating people by 31 and a half points a game? Is this just going to be another beatdown?
The one thing I'm very curious about in this matchup, and it's going to help Wake Forest, and one thing that would help us is if you hit the like button. Wake Forest, they they don't shoot the three well. They only shoot like 31%. They don't shoot a lot of attempts. But they are really good at guarding the three. So they only shoot 31%, but they hold their opponents to 31%. And the reason I'm intrigued by that is, I mean, outside of the last game, Duke has been shooting really well from three. And I almost wonder if it's a good thing that Evans got all of those misses out of the way before this game against Wake Forest. Because he I think we know Isaiah Evans at this point. If he's starting, which I think we both agree he will start again, there's a high chance he's getting up 8+ 3-pointers.
Well, he has
So
he has absolutely no conscience. I mean, it doesn't matter.
right now, the only thing that gives me some concern in this game is you combine Wake Forest's ability to guard the three with their slower tempo and those misses. Evans may not get as many opportunities to find his rhythm because they'll play at a slower tempo. There will be less total shots than Duke has had these last few games. I think Coach Forbes' job in terms of telling his team we've got to play slow is pretty easy based off the fact that Duke is averaging near 100 points or 100 points in their last 5 games. So I think that job as a coach is pretty easy. You're like, we're not going to win a track meet. We only have 6 or 7 guys as it is. It's just not a recipe for Wake Forest to win the game. So the 3-point shooting and the pace, I think, are the two ways where Wake Forest can keep this game closer.
Well, I'm sure the other way that you can help us out is with your comments and sharing this with your friends. But um, it'll be interesting to see in the comments whether there's anyone that wants to make the argument that this is not the same team that we played, that we were back when we played them the first time, and averaging a margin of victory of 31.3 points per game over the last 6 games, and hitting 104 times. There is an argument for that. On the other hand, no Malik Brown and no Tyrese Proctor. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know where Caleb Foster is, but he is not part of that rotation until, we've got that lead, and, Caleb can come in the final 6 minutes. He'll get some minutes, but he's not going to be it. So that's three guys that are not going to be part of it, which means there's still an 8-man rotation. I believe it's an 8-man rotation, and it's the last home game. Wait,
Oh, yes. Good point.
Senior night?
Senior night.
Are there any seniors?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Spencer Hubbard,
Spencer Hubbard.
Neil Begovich, Stanley Borden, Cooper Flagg.
It is senior night for Spencer Hubbard.
Oh,
And
and then obviously, I was just going to say, Sion James, Mason Gillis. It's a little bit of a different senior night for them, but
it is. It's likely to be the last game for a lot of these guys to play in the regular season in Cameron Indoor. And, I'm looking for motivation always in these ACC games, and I'm looking for any edge. And there is a love affair between the Duke fans and Spencer Hubbard. It is just like nothing I've ever seen. And, one of the things that Coach Shire said is, he really is a good player. He's not surprised by him hitting threes. He's not surprised by him going to the basket. But, given the players that they can recruit, given everything else. So here's my last comment. We're doing it for Spencer Hubbard. And we're going to win by 15. And the score, because they play at a slightly slower pace, will be 82-67.
okay. I'm glad you got there because it's very possible that last night's Saturday's game against Florida State, Spencer Hubbard's last time taking the court at Cameron. I think this game will be too close for that to happen. So what a way for him to end. He has a 5-point explosion. He's got the steal and score. He's now second on the Duke team in scoring per 40 minutes, only behind Cooper Flagg. That's a good spot to be. And you said, what did you say, 82-67? I'm going to actually even lower. I think it's going to be 75-68 Duke.
Well, I want to give a little margin there, because with a little margin, that final minute belongs to Spencer Hubbard.
I hope so. That would be a great way to wrap up the home schedule for Duke. It would be a great way to end the season undefeated at home, which would be awesome, and to get Hubbard, one more shot at taking the court. I don't think it's going to happen. I think this Wake Forest team is too good for that to happen, but I've said that a lot lately, and Duke keeps winning by more. And that reminds me, I heard your point before. I went back and looked at my notes. So this time, Duke is coming in. They've won 6 straight, and they're winning by close to 30 points a game. Last time, I heard your point. I had to go back and look. It really wasn't too much different. At the time, they had won 12 straight and had won several in a row by 20 or more. I was looking, I don't have the exact numbers because I was trying to pull it up as you're talking, but not going backwards. They had beat Boston College by 25. They beat Miami by 35. They had that close game with Notre Dame where they only ended up winning by 8. They beat Pittsburgh by 29. They beat SMU by 27. They beat Virginia Tech by 23. So I heard what you're saying. I thought it made a lot of sense, and then I went back and looked, and I was like, I guess the margins were less. They were more in the 20 points than the 30-point variety. But it does seem like they've gone to a new gear.
Yeah, it's a new gear, and let's give Leonard Hamilton his due there. He said he has not seen a connected Duke team like this team is connected. And even though I think you're parallel to the high scores that they had won a number of their games by before they played them last time, they've since lost a tough loss at Clemson, and they have been like, I maybe
And
they could beat the Washington Wizards.
and I guess to wrap us up, to Coach Hamilton's point, I was watching Baylor recently. I wanted to check in on our guy Jeremy Roach, and they have a potential top 5 pick in VJ Edgecombe. And they had a really close game with Cincinnati. It was like a 1 or 2 point game the final 5 minutes, right? They would get a bucket, Baylor, and the only guys who would stand up on the bench would be, the guys at the very end of the bench. Maybe you'd get a clap, from some of the guys who were playing but not on the court or expected to be playing. And then the coaches the coaches were the most animated. Forget the guys at the end of the bench. And that to me was a big, red flag, right? With their camaraderie, their ability to be together. This Duke team, everybody is up off the bench anytime something happens. It's the whole team, from Cooper Flag down to Neil Begovic and Stanley Borden. Everybody is into the game from the tip off to the end of the game, and honestly, as of late, more so at the end of the game. And that says a lot about this team, and I think Coach Hamilton's comments really ring true. And with that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys post game after the Duke Wake Forest game. Should be around 9:05 Eastern time, depending on how many stoppages and if there's overtime of this game. So make sure to check us out for the post game show, and we'll see you guys then. We are also for the previews on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I really would love if our viewers would put their prediction into the chat, because this is a tough one for me as to which way this is going to go. So for all of you that listen to us, that would be really great if you could just throw your projected score and a sentence as to why you think so.
Great point. We'll see you guys post game. Peace.